Hello, I'm Lynne Suprock, and today we're going to learn how to stamp into solder. The technique of stamping into solder has been around for a while. I love to use it on copper and incorporate this technique into making things like little books, earrings, and just in general using it in applying it to other mixed media projects. What you first need is a heat-proof mat. I use a silicone mat that protects your workspace, and then I use a kiln block or a brick or a solderite brick or a charcoal block, anything that's not going to sink the heat to work on. You'll need a soldering iron, and make sure your tip is large enough to use on your copper piece because you don't want the heat to sink away too quickly, then the solder won't melt. I have lead-free solder that I do use. I use a water-soluble lead-free flux that you have to apply to the metal first, and then a flux brush, which I've cut the bristles off the tip because I don't really need them so long. I have a sal ammoniac block, and that's to help tin my tip. Sometimes the soldering iron gets a little black or gunky and you have to clean it, so I use that. And all those chemicals that you're using in this process, you want to make sure you have a fume mask or a fume extractor. And at the very least, open a window and have a fan for good ventilation. I have stamps that I use. Make sure they're red rubber stamps. A basin of water I set beside my work area. And then to clean the copper before we begin, I use Penny Bright and a little Scotch pad. If you don't clean your copper, it has a residue, and then the solder really won't stick to it, and the flux will have to work extra hard. So you want to make sure your piece is nice and shiny, and you'll just clean it up and rinse it off, and you'll be ready to go. I don't use gloves when I use Penny Bright because it is a natural product, so it's non-toxic. You can see how that shine really comes out after you've applied the Penny Bright. Now I rinse a little bit in water, and I'll have to dry it off. Make sure it's nice and dry, and then we'll be ready to begin. You just use a paper towel or a terry cloth towel to wipe, and then be careful not to touch it once it's dry with your fingers to get oil on it from your hands. I'm going to use the flux now, which is a little bit acidic. Oh well, back that up. I'm going to tin the iron to make sure that the iron is clean and ready to go. I put a little bit of solder down into that block, and then I twist, and you can see how bright that tip is. I also use a soldering iron with a rheostat because I like to control the temperature, and I usually set that at number 8. Okay, so now you're going to put a little bit of flux on your piece where you would like to see the solder. So I'm just going to do part of this book plate. Just make sure you get a nice coating of the flux onto the copper. Take a little bit of your solder, and then come in with your iron in a downward motion, pick up some of that solder and steady the plate. I use the end of the rest of the solder to do that, and then use the flat part of that iron and let it heat the copper for just a second before you move it around. And you can see that solder is a bit liquefied. It's very hot, it's very liquefied, which is the perfect temperature to take on that rubber stamp. Again, use the red rubber stamps for solder stamping so you don't burn them or destroy them. And you can see it was that quick. It's very hot, so you want to pick it up to examine it with a pair of pliers. But you could see how it left the indentation of the stamp, or the pattern of the stamp, into the solder. That was pretty easy. So after I've quenched it, wiped it off here, we can continue the process and choose another area on that front plate to stamp and to solder. So I'm just going to add a little bit to the bottom. I think that's going to look really nice with the copper exposed in the solder. Okay, downward motion, pick up some solder, and then press it onto the plate for a second, heating up that copper, and then with the flat part of the iron you just move it around. Make sure it's all nice and hot and appears like liquefied, like a liquid metal. And in just a split second, when you lift your iron, you're going to press down the stamp. So you have to get everything set and ready to go, and there you have it. Don't get real excited and touch that copper by any means, because it's really hot, so you want to make sure you have pliers on hand. But look how that turned out. That's gorgeous. I love it. So I quench that, clean it off a bit. Okay, then if you would like, you could just dry it, inspect it, but if there's a little residue on there from the flux still, you could clean it again with the penny bright. Make sure it's all nice and shined up and residue free. An additional step to this when you're finished, it would be to add patina, but we're not going to do that in the video today. But if you'd like to bring out the ridges or the stamp marks, you would add just a little bit of Novocan or Jack's patina or liver of sulfur onto the copper to give that a little bit of a dark hue. You can kind of experiment, but just plain and simple, I like how that looks. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Go out and experiment.